Welcome to the Indiana Lawyer Podcast. I'm your host, Maura Johnson, and today we're honoring Constitution Day with a discussion on constitutional limits and how the nation's executive branch fits into that. There's been a lot of discussion nationally about whether some of President Donald Trump's decisions are testing the nation's constitutional guardrails on executive power. Today we'll examine some of the president's actions under those parameters with attorneys Sheila Suess Kennedy and Jim Bopp. But before we get into the episode, let's hear a word from our sponsor, Taft.
Taft, today's modern law firm. At Taft, we cultivate a highly respectful, transparent workplace that fosters creativity, teamwork, inclusion, and diversity. We couple our culture with a client-first approach, rewarding lawyers who understand their clients' goals and work to deliver success. Taft, the modern law firm. To learn more, visit taftlaw.com.
First question to pose to both of you is, to what extent has President Trump's use of executive orders expanded presidential authority beyond historical norms? Ms. Kennedy, I'll start with you.
Well, that is a fascinating question because that constant stream of executive orders frequently has assumed authority that is constitutionally given to Congress. And thus far, lower courts, by about 80%, have found that he didn't have that authority. That said, I think it has expanded executive power considerably because Congress has refused to act to keep its own authority. And one of the problems that I see, one of the constitutional crises, if you will, is the somewhat surprising lack of separation of powers that our particular structure is founded on. If Congress refuses to use its constitutional authority, then by default, the presidency becomes more powerful.
Well, it's certainly true that President Trump has been very aggressive in using his executive authority. But the answer to your question will play out over the next year or so as these cases work up to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court gives us definitive rulings on these questions. But one thing that she didn't mention is if you get outside the district courts into the U.S. Supreme Court, there's been about 20 rulings by the U.S. Supreme Court. 80% Trump has won, overturning in various ways, either through stays, etc., and even merits decisions. The overreach of these district court judges. So the constitutional crisis that I see right now is the assumption by usually very liberal Democrat-appointed judges to use extraordinary powers, unprecedented powers, to stifle administrative and executive action. There's 604 district court judges. They initially assumed that they could issue nationwide injunctions that an action of the President of the United States elected by an overwhelming majority of the people and the Electoral College, that each one of them could exercise what amounts to executive authority and stop executive action throughout the country involving every person. And so now, the liberal view of judging is what's called the living constitution, which is taught in law schools throughout the country. And that allows judges to use their policy preference in their judging. It's been justified by them. And that is so inherently anti-democratic. It's really stunning. And I think that's likely to be, once the dust settles here, that's the real problem that we faced.
May I? A couple of things that you've said are simply inaccurate. First of all, the lower court justices have been those appointed by both Republican and Democratic and even Trump's own appointees. And the Supreme Court has been operating, which is very different than the Supreme Court ever did, through its shadow docket, and failing to give the lower courts an explanation when they do overturn those lower court decisions. And in fact, many of the lower court judges, and that includes many very conservative judges, including, for example, Judge Ludig, have been very critical of this particular Supreme Court, which has been labeled a rogue court. So I think that the landscape is considerably different than the landscape you have just described.
And it's great that you invited us both here, because we do disagree on a number of things and look at things in a different perspective. So now, in order to justify the Supreme Court overturning district court judges through perfectly legitimate processes such as stays, I've gotten a stay in the United States Supreme Court of a lower court decision. So that's not like something out of bounds or something. It's a part of the system. So now we're going to condemn the whole United States Supreme Court as being illegitimate because they're not ruling in liberals' favor. Well, I'm sorry. That's not the standard.
That is a very inaccurate description of the criticism.
And people can judge for themselves.
Yes, they can, and they are.
That's my point of view.
Now I kind of want to just go through a few examples of recent decisions by the president and kind of talk through your thoughts on, whether these are appropriate executive decisions under the Constitution. To start off, was his effort to redirect appropriated funds a challenge to Congress's constitutional power of the purse?
In my view, very much a challenge to that. The Constitution gives the Congress the authority to make financial decisions. Now, one of the problems that I see right now is the lack of spine in so many of our congressional people. They're just not asserting the powers that have been granted to them under the Constitution. And that is their problem, not that of the president is pushing, and they're not pushing back. But I think the Constitution clearly gives the power of the purse to Congress, and the founders clearly believed that the legislature would be the first among equals, the strongest branch, and thus far that strength has not been exercised.
Well, I think it's too bad when people attack, members of Congress or other people personally, saying they don't have a spine when they have an honest disagreement. They have an honest disagreement on whether or not the president is properly exercising his authority, and we have a divided Congress on that question. And when it takes 60 votes to go through the Senate, there's no 60 votes for any moderately conservative proposition, much less some of the strongly conservative positions the president has taken. So it's not that these people are chicken or they're cowards, like you're suggesting, but they just simply disagree with you on the policy position, and therefore are not trying to rein back Trump in areas which they agree.
Well, we will continue to disagree.
How should courts weigh Trump's challenges to state election administration under the Constitution? And Mr. Bopp, I'll go to you first this time.
Well, that's another interesting question, and there's no question that the time, place, and manner of elections under the Constitution is reserved to the states. However, with respect to federal elections, if and therefore any election in which there are federal officers to be elected, you also have heightened federal power to regulate the election. And now it seems that that both sides, and I'm not sure about this on either side, both sides have sought to exert considerable authority with respect to elections. There was a H.R. 1 that the Democrats supported and pushed very hard when they had control of Congress, weren't able to pass it, that would basically have federalized every aspect of every election in the United States. That never got passed, and now we see the president exercising more modest effort to regulate state and federal elections that are generally conducted by the states. I am not sure that I want the federal government, by either the president or by Congress, doing that. I think it's a very important safeguard to our democracy that the federal government does not exercise authority over state elections. So in both respects, I'm both the Democrat effort and the Trump's effort, I really question.
Well, aside from the mischaracterization of that Democratic bill, I tend to agree with you. I think that the Constitution does give the states authority to conduct the time, place, and manner of elections, and that should remain. And I simply look at the president's effort in that particular regard as an effort to avoid well, let's just say that the man who sees all elections that go against him as rigged is perhaps attempting to rig his own. But whatever our basic positions on that might be, I think we follow the Constitution and we leave the time, place, and manner of elections to the states.
One of the common threads, I've been involved in political law since 1975, and one of the common threads you see is politicians have never lost a fair election. They're always saying, it was rigged, or this was done, or that was done, and that's the reason I lost, rather than looking in the mirror maybe for your own faults or whatever the case may be, or the electorate just isn't favorable to you, whatever the case may be. So it's kind of a common thing. Stacey Abrams, was invited to a meeting of the Democrat governors after she'd lost governorship of Georgia, and because she claimed she didn't really lose it. So this is kind of a bipartisan thing, but I also am really reluctant to cast aspersions on people about trying to rig future elections. And I think what is most useful is to evaluate things on their merits. In other words, do we have a policy agreement or disagreement about certain things? Now, with respect to Trump in this case, the things that he wants to, his policy positions expressed in his executive order have to do with two. One very, very popular thing, which is a voter ID, that everybody has to prove that through some official government issued ID that you're the actual voter that is voting your ballot. The huge majority of people of every walk of life support that proposition. And we have it here in Indiana. Many states have adopted it. And the other was his policy, which would be to minimize mail-in balloting. And of course that everyone knows, and there was actually a bipartisan consensus on this up until 2020, which was that the safest and most secure method of voting is at the polling place. When you take your ballot and hand it to the person to put in the box, 100% of the time it'll go into the box, okay? But how many times, if you mail it in, okay, will it go into the box? Well, we know that, it's less, for sure, all right? And when you have ballots just floating around, in mailboxes that anybody could pick up in the household or readily steal, as opposed to having them secured in a polling place, then they become more available for people to do something nefarious. And so in 2020, the reason really this is a problem is in 2020, the Democrats and liberals brought 415 lawsuits to do two things: expand mail-in balloting, and number two is to knock down anti-fraud protections in mail-in balloting, such as signature matches, witness requirements were the two big ones that they attacked in court. And then that was a big push toward a less secure method of voting. And Trump, I think, justifiably on the policy grounds, not exercising the power, as I've already explained, but on a policy grounds, he's right, is that the more we go back to in-person voting, the more secure our elections will be.
Well, I'll tell the people in those nursing homes not to do that.
That's legal.
There are 3 states that vote entirely by mail, and there have been no security problems with that. That is a policy issue, and I do tend to think that you live in a different world than I do. But at any rate, the Constitution gives the states the right to decide those issues, a time, place, and manner of elections. And I think that is one thing we both do agree about. Mm-hmm. That authority should remain with the states.
Yeah. Well, in 2005, there was a commission appointed, self-appointed, a Republican, former Secretary of State Jim Baker, and the former President of the United States, President Carter, who chaired that commission, and they issued a report, and they said exactly what I just said. Then this commission was made up of Republicans and Democrats, and they explained in their section on absentee voting and mail-in balloting what I just said. So when I say there was a bipartisan consensus on the issue, that's a demonstration of that. But that broke down in 2020, and it was at the impetus of the Democrats and the liberals who brought all these enormous number of lawsuits to force to have rulings that set aside state laws that limited absentee voting. And you mentioned one form everybody's agreed with, which is people voting in nursing homes, but they do it not by mail-in Indiana. They do it by a voting team that's made up of a Republican and a Democrat that actually goes to the nursing home, and they have a procedure for a secret ballot for the nursing home residents. So you can see in that procedure, we have a Republican and a Democrat, so that we have safeguards. All right. Of course, mail-in, you don't have that. But that's been a recognized exception to in-person voting that I think everybody agrees to.
To move on.
Yes.
Do you think that Trump's judicial appointments and loyalty tests for appointees raise questions about the independence of co-equal branches?
My biggest concern when you talk about co-equal branches is what I see as the breakdown of separation of powers and the abdication that I see, whether it is by cowardice or agreement or whatever, of the constitutional prerogatives of the legislative branch. So yes, I am very concerned about those kinds of loyalty tests that have occurred.
What loyalty tests are you talking about? I mean, I don't know of any loyalty tests. I don't know of any loyalty tests.
You don't read them. Never mind.
I do know that the Democrat presidents, when they vetted Supreme Court nominees, they've asked their position on Roe v. Wade and whether or not they would vote to keep Roe v. Wade. I know of those kinds of tests, but I don't know of any loyalty tests by Trump. What would that possibly be? And what is the evidence of it? I know of no evidence of that. Now, they certainly ask them about their general judicial philosophy, and that's not a loyalty test. That's finding out whether or not
the question was not about Supreme Court justices. It was about
every other justice, every other judge,
not judges. the people that have been hired by the administration to be in the administration it wasn't reflecting judicial appointments.
I thought that was what your question about was his judicial appointments and the loyalty test.
And loyalty test, yeah. But I mean, if you,
but you ask it in the context of judicial appointments, and that's what I answered.
Okay.
I don't know of any such loyalty test. Now, for people that work in the administration, absolutely you ought to have a loyalty test. I mean, the personnel is policy, and everyone knows.
This is the first time I have enthusiastically agreed with you.
Yeah, right. There we go. See, it's amazing as we talk about things, we can have agreement.
Yeah.
And
if you look at the cabinet of this administration, I think that is absolutely the people who are in charge reflect the policy of this administration, and we may differ very strongly on how we assess that the competence of this administration.
Right. And by the way, behind this, what we're just talking about is a legal issue, which is that is still unsettled, and that is what's called the unified executive, because under the Constitution, the president is the executive branch. Okay? And so the issue is, can Congress set up entities within the executive branch that are not responsible to the president, all right? And, that is being played out in some issues regarding board appointments, okay, where Trump, somebody's been appointed by a previous president with a term, that is still unexpired, and whether he can remove that person, all right? And the argument that the Trump lawyers are making is we have a unified executive. It's one person, the president of the United States, and everybody that works for him within the executive has to be responsible to him, all right? Now, again, that, I guess they say that's unsettled, but there are, from the Trump side, some hopeful signs because they have approved or lifted stays or whatever the case may be, firings of several board officials that would otherwise still be in office. So we'll see how that works out.
What other expansions of the president's power have you seen as either appropriate or inappropriate under the Constitution?
To go through a list, and again, I don't think any of those expansions that have been attempted are settled at this point. It remains to be seen how far this court will allow the presidency to expand and become a very authoritarian position. Trump is obviously, through these various executive orders, pushing the boundaries of what we have previously thought of as presidential authority and power, and whether those expansions will persist, what ultimately the court system will allow, I think is all up for grabs right now.
Yeah, and I agree also very strongly in the separation of powers that's an important protection of our liberty by requiring, within their appropriate spheres, providing authority within their appropriate spheres to affect policy. I think that's really important. But come on, there's nothing unusual about a president pushing the envelope on his authority. Let's think about President Roosevelt during World War II putting all Japanese American citizens in concentration camps. No president has ever done that before.
Nor
should they, of course. And or we can talk about Truman seizing the steel companies, which the Supreme Court struck down. Or we can talk about Biden providing or waiving, school debt, in the hundreds of billions of dollars. That Pelosi had already said that takes an act of Congress, not the authority of the president, and that's been much of that has been struck down. So and of course, all this means what I'm just describing means all these people are human. They tend to think that when they get in these lofty positions, that what they want as policy is a good thing, and the people have endorsed that because they got elected, and therefore they they try to look for loopholes or vague words, or just do things that have never been done before. I mean, I think much of the vast majority of that is not somebody trying to be evil, wanting to be an authoritarian, like these foolish statements that are being made about Trump, but just natural things that the founders understood. And that's the reason they created separation of powers. They created a limited government under the Constitution. That's the reason that the courts have the authority, properly so, have the authority to strike down the acts of presidents. So it's just people are human.
Given that all that Trump has worked to accomplish over the past several months, in your eyes, has any of it put the nation closer to a constitutional crisis? And what lines would have to be crossed to consider it a crisis?
That becomes wordplay. It's what is a constitutional crisis depends on how you define constitutional crisis. I see a constitutional crisis in the fact that our federal government is just not working, and it's not working properly. Whether that is all at Trump's doorstep is a matter of opinion. I mean, I really see very, very significant concerns with all three branches of government right now. I think it's impossible to look at where we are right now and think that everything's hunky-dory and everything's working well. It is not. And the level of incivility that is daily assaulting us, the anger and the hostility, and it is an unprecedented time. And whether you believe that policy A is better than policy B is really not what we're doing right now. We have a base of people in what used to be my political party who are simply angry at everything. And I mean, there are so many things that are happening right now in this country that are not necessarily a direct result of the dysfunctions of our government, but are certainly feeding into those dysfunctions. I am very concerned. I just don't think that our government is working right now.
There's a lot of reasons to say to agree to what she just said. I mean, the polarization, all right, is a huge problem, all right, and when you don't have common ground, which traditionally and historically we have had a lot of common ground, sometimes not, like leading up to the Civil War, of course. I mean, there's certainly been those times too, but where we've had both common ground and we've had the willingness of people to work across the aisle on things that they agree with, the common ground being what they agree with, of course. And but right now it's pretty both sides are saying either yes or no, and when you got to get 60% of the Democrats right now, 60%, or the Republicans if the thing was switched. The Democrats took over the Senate. Either way, it's just very, very difficult for Congress to act. And that's I regret that. Now, there's other things that are happening. We could point to the rise and justification of political violence, which is just, just terrible development in certain quarters. And of course, Trump's been a victim of those efforts of political violence, but so have some Democrats as well. So it's we've got to restore common ground, is what I would say, and we have to restore limits to our disagreements. Just because somebody disagrees with you on a policy basis, in my opinion, does not mean that person's an evil person. It doesn't have to do with their character, their integrity, their truthfulness, whatever. You can have honest, good faith disagreements on policy, and both sides can be, good people. All right. But, that we also have a problem with that. Is just, the only reason somebody disagrees with me is because they're an evil person, so I'm going to treat them that way or call them that. That's a problem. That makes civil discourse really difficult. If you've got to keep fending off, false claims of you're a racist, you're a fascist, you're a authoritarian, and that all has to do with, your motive, your character and all that. And, people that would truly be racist and fascists or authoritarians, I don't want anything to do with those people. Okay. And I understand why you wouldn't want, nobody would want, surely would want anything to do with those people. But to call people that because you disagree with them on policy questions is just taking it to another level that really poisons the political system, and that's another problem. So yes, there are significant problems, but have presidents push the envelope on their authority? As far as I know, from the beginning of time, and meaning when the first ruler of some nation or tribe or clan or whatever arose, they pushed their authority. And, our founders created a whole series of safeguards, to minimize and prevent that from happening. And I think we should be thankful.
Are not operating well.
Right? Well, some aren't, as I just said.
I know you said that. But,
I agree. I agree. I'm trying to agree with you by saying that, because I do agree with you and that's why I said that.
Are we done?
Yep. Thank you both for joining me and for having these questions with me. I appreciate it.
Thank you for asking.
Yes. And a pleasure to have the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Indiana Lawyer Podcast. If you'd like to read more legal stories from around the state, you can visit our website at theindianalawyer.com. There you can subscribe to our newsletters and find podcasts from across the IBJ Media Company. You can also follow us on social media. Thanks, and we'll see you again in 2 weeks.